Hey folks, Ryan Pelton here. Before we roll today's episode, let me give you a quick heads up. What you're about to hear is our guest's story, based on his own research and perspective. We are not presenting this as proven fact. I bring these conversations to the Ryan Files because I'm seeking the truth. But my job isn't to hand you the truth, it's to hand you a perspective. Some of what you'll hear today may just blow your mind. What you do with that, that's on you. As always, think for yourself, dig deeper, and decide where the truth really is.
Back in the 80s, the mid-80s, when my mentor, who got me into my national security intelligence community career, he's also the man that taught me all sorts of interesting things about, psychic stuff and necromancy. He literally taught me how to go to a cemetery, select a person, and raise them from the dead to get information from them. And he told me a few years after he started teaching me stuff, he goes, look, there's people expecting you to know how to do this, expecting you to know how to do this, expecting you to know how to do this, expecting you to know how to do this.
Hello, amazing people, and welcome back to the Ryan Files. What if I told you that buried beneath layers of classified history is a truth far older, far deeper, and far more advanced than what we've been allowed to believe? From secret societies that survived the Crusades, to breakaway groups with all the money in the world and anti-gravity tech, from ancient cartographic knowledge looted in Constantinople, to possible underground civilizations influencing us to this very day, what if it's all part of the same story? Tonight, we dive into that story. My guest is Walter Bosley, former Air Force counterintelligence officer, FBI special agent in counterterrorism, and now one of the most fascinating voices pulling back the veil on secret tech, Nazi science, Antarctica anomalies, the Collins elite, the occult in governments, and what he calls America selling its soul. If you've ever wondered where the missing trillions went, what was really found in Antarctica, and whether advanced civilizations survived the flood and went underground, this episode is just for you. Now, as always, we explore big ideas and radical questions on this show. That doesn't mean we endorse every theory or every claim, but we will ask the questions you're not supposed to ask. And today that starts with one word: NIMSA. This is the Ryan Files. Let's get into it. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me this week on the Ryan Files. Tonight on the Ryan Files, we're joined by someone who's been on both sides of the veil. Walter Bosley is a former U.S. Air Force counterintelligence officer, a special agent with the FBI's anti-terrorism task force, and now one of the most compelling researchers exposing what lies beneath the surface of official history. Let's welcome Walter Bosley to the Ryan Files. Thanks for coming on, man.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to this.
Man, I'll tell you what, it's been a second. We've been trying to hook this up, and life is funny, right? So I appreciate you being on. Walter, You're just, you're a man of, gosh, we're going to talk about a lot tonight. Tell our audience a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you're coming from, and then we'll get diving in.
Well, I've been a small press publisher now for going on, 23 years. And before that, I had a little career in national security, U.S. national security, working for the FBI. Then I got my Air Force commission, became a special agent for the Air Force OSI. And then after that, worked as a contractor in counterterrorism around the world, got to see a lot of the world doing that job. And shortly before I left that, I started my publishing company, and the original intention was to do pulp adventure fiction, classic adventure entertainment. And a few years into that, I started thinking again about my weird experience at Disneyland, and decided in 2007 to write a book about that, which became my first nonfiction book. And now I'm like 18 nonfiction books later. And I kind of became that guy. Yeah. So I've used my intelligence and investigative background to great benefit, digging into these weird historical curiosities and strange mysteries. So it really worked well together.
Very cool, man. It's a wild world out there. I tell you what, if you start digging in, there's all kinds of little questions that need to be asked,
Oh yeah.
and sometimes you can get answers, sometimes you can't. One of the things that through your work, you have caught this term, breakaway civilization,
Mm-hmm.
that really encapsulates so many different topics. But tell us a little bit about what is, he coined the term sort of. So for folks new to it, what does that mean? What are we talking about? Breakaway civilization.
Breakaway civilization. Well, I've since altered my use of that term to breakaway group, because civilization is too big of a word. But essentially, a breakaway group is a group of people who have the material resources and means that they can survive independently. They can develop their own technology that they, can keep to themselves. They have, in popular parlance, they have, that phrase, "F you money," right?
Yeah.
Kind of the screw you, I don't need your money, I've got enough of my own. So they can kind of do their own thing. And the reason I don't use the word civilization in that phrase anymore is because these groups really coexist with us, in our world. They just simply have access and access to things that most of us don't, or at least the means to create what they need that they, kind of just use on their own. And that's where breakaway comes from. Now, the extreme definition of that could literally be a breakaway civilization, a group of people who do this and literally go to some island, or they go to another planet, so to speak. Now we're getting into the science fiction kind of arena. And they truly break away and have nothing to do with us, and do establish their own civilization, as it were. But I think what we're dealing with are little breakaway groups that are kind of in their early steps of becoming the bigger thing down the road.
I got you. So when would you, kind of putting your fingerprint on this, where would you say this started? What was the genesis of this, and how long has this been developing?
Well, we don't know for sure, because history is full of strange stories of, the most popular example you can point to are flying machines, right? Things flying in the skies, and interesting people that are flying them. They're, for the most part, human, the way they're described. So they're like us. But, whereas a lot of people would assume that, they were from another world, they might not have been. They might have just been this private little group that was dabbling in flying technology that they learned through, old lore, old literature, maybe secret society, legacy information handed down through the generations. And as they went, they developed it for themselves in private. So, we can't really put a finger on when this started, but as far as our times are concerned, I've pulled the thread leading back to the 1850s with the German group, the Sonora Aero Club. Now, the Sonora Aero Club was based in California. So the reason we call it the German group is because it was made up of German immigrants. And they did have a connection to this mysterious organization called NIMSA, which was based in Berlin.
NIMSA.
The guy who told us about it was from Brandenburg, but Berlin is where this mysterious NIMSA was based before Germany was united, when it was 48 Prussian states.
Interesting. So the Sonora Club in California, Sonora, California, what went on there? If you're in the 1850s, you're well before the Wright brothers and all that.
Oh yeah, 50 some years, right?
Yeah.
Well, What we had, according to a man named Charles Delshow, when he was a young man, he was sponsored and sent from Germany here to the United States to go to California and report on the Sonora Aero Club and report back to the German NIMSA. Now, Delshow writes about all of this between 1893 and 1923. 1923 was the year he died. So for a period of 30 years, he's writing about this Sonora Aero Club. We're building these flying machines. Now, they're not big examples of giant airships. They're smaller proof of concept contraption kind of things. They did have designs for larger ones, okay? But according to Delshow, they never got around to building the larger ones when he knew them. And he did these books. He kept a journal, but he did these books, dozens of books with hundreds of illustrations of these flying machines that he claimed that they were designing and in some cases building and flying.
Wow.
And it's a really interesting story that a lot of people say, you know, they go to Google and immediately, oh, well, he was an outsider artist. This was all his imagination. The problem with that is that's lazy scholarship, because everyone who's looked deeper into Delshow has found much more than just an outsider artist. Right. There have been 6 or 7 researchers before me who really presented the Delshow story in greater depth and detail. And it looks to me and others like this group really existed. And when the German group, NIMSA, sent a representative out here to California to take a look himself, they didn't actually get along. Oh, wow. The gentleman who was in charge of the Sonora Aero Club, they didn't get along, and there was an accident, and we're told that the leader of the Sonora Aero Club, Peter Menace, died in a fiery crash. But we don't know for sure. And Malia, who you met earlier, she and another lady found what appears to be a gravesite for this Peter Menace gentleman, which was well after he was supposed to have died in this fiery crash. So, you know, there's little things like that that speak to the truth about what Delshow, you know, was trying to say, trying to write about, and tell us about, I should say. Now, what's interesting is Sonora Aero Club disappears in the 1850s, okay? Delshow shows this schematic, and he shows it more than once, of the how the engine, the particular turbine, as it were, worked in these flying machines that the Sonora Aero Club built. And I found about a year and a half ago, a couple of years ago, that it was identical to what's called the Rankine turbine, Rankine. And that was published in 1849. So it looks like the Sonora Aero Club applied the Rankine turbine design, and they used their own fuel, as it were, this green liquid they called the soup. And this resulted in anti-gravity, for lack of a better term.
Wow.
You know, so it was interesting how applying this technology that was published in the 1840s gave them flight, allegedly, 50 some years before the Wright brothers, right? At Kitty Hawk. Now, what's also interesting is 10 years later, during the Civil War, the American Civil War, a gentleman by the name of Solomon Andrews, he had designed a flying machine, not a balloon. They were using hot air balloons in those days, but these were not balloons. The Sonora Aero Club were not flying dirigibles. They were not flying balloons.
Yeah.
And Solomon Andrews contacted Abraham Lincoln, told him about his device. Lincoln said, oh, absolutely, I want my War Department guys to check this out. So Solomon Andrews gave a demonstration in Washington, D.C. There were reporters there that reported on it. There's a news story on this. And it described his flying machine that he called the Aeron. interesting that the Sonora Aero Club, AERO, referred to their flying machines as arrows, which it's a prefix for flight, right? A flying machine kind of thing, but it's still interesting.
Yeah.
And then Solomon Andrews had his Aeron. He demonstrates it. History tells us, nah, the war secretary, Edwin Stanton, said, we're in the middle of a war. We got to finish this war. We don't have time for this kind of stuff. And that was the end of it. I don't believe that. I don't buy that. I think that the Aeron technology was developed starting at the end of the war. And 30 years later is why we had the great airship mystery. I think the 1890s airships of the great airship mystery were actually the result of, the camera's going weird there, the result of 30 years of development of Solomon Andrews Aeron technology.
Right. Right. Interesting. So you're
sorry about that.
Yeah, no worries. The airship in 1890 was seen by many witnesses, correct? Mm-hmm. And this is at a time when this should not have existed, and this wasn't an airship like a dirigible. This was some sort of other propulsion.
Yeah, these were not dirigibles. These were not hot air balloons in any way. They were not Zeppelins.
Right.
They were machines that used some type of exotic lift technology, anti-gravity, for lack of a better term. And they had some similar elements, okay, and apparatuses on these 1890s airships, as did the Sonora Aero Club flying machines in the 1850s. And that was rotating, spinning elements, one of which I discovered with Stephen Romano, the publisher of probably the best book on the art of Delschau. A rudimentary version of the bell, believe it or not. And
Diglocka.
Diglocka. There it was. It's in Delschau's art. He shows 2 or 3 depictions of it, okay? Bell-shaped, central axis, rotates, and he called it the generator cone, and that's what gave them that magic touch for the anti-gravity. And there it was in his books. Remember, he died in 1923, so sometime between 1893 and 1923, Charles Delschau depicted what we know as the bell, claiming that it was used in the 1850s for these flying machines, okay? And he dies 20 years before, legend has it, the Nazis were developing their Diglocka, their bell.
Right.
Worked on the basic same principles. So it looks like this German guy, Peter Menace, and his associates in the Sonora Aero Club were using a proof of concept prototype of the bell. So where did they get this? Well, I say, ancient knowledge. It's a long line of ancient knowledge passed down. But I do argue that we can trace the Nazi bell back to what the Sonora Aero Club was doing. Okay, and I've done that in my research with the thread of the German connection there. Okay, because there is that German thread that can't be ignored.
Well, before we get into the German connection, because that's where I do want to go on this, but I mean, I find it interesting that the bell, or like you said, Diglocka, resembles, in the Vedas and the Upanishads in Indian, history. It looks like one of the Vimana. I mean, it really kind of
looks like, yeah.
And I mean, they were talking, there's alleged descriptions of almost like Mercury vortex engines that you're talking about. I think kind of just this rotational thing with, certain kind of juice, as you say, maybe liquid mercury, but
the bell and the Vimana's Mercury has been tied to them. There's another element in the soup of the Sonora Aero Club. I'm not prepared to talk about yet. We're still doing the research on it, but we think we found what the secret ingredient of this green soup was.
Interesting.
So pretty soon when I'll be able to break that publicly.
That would be awesome. So this all does kind of interestingly enough connect back to, and it's why is it that everything seems technology wise, right? Seems to in some way get back to World War II, World War One, World War II, especially Germany. I mean, it's fascinating that so much of everything kind of goes back to that time period between the 30s, 40s, 50s. And then, of course, it kind of all got transferred over to the United States, some to Russia.
Sure. When you look at history from the big view, it really isn't that surprising because we're talking between the Sonora Aero Club and the rise of the Nazis, right? Nazi Germany. You know, you're talking 80 years, you know, and when you look at when they were the Prussian states and they were pushing for the unification of Germany, and then they got that, and then they, you know, building it's really a very natural and unsurprising progression that actually started in the medieval era. Okay, during the Fourth Crusade, that legendary Fourth Crusade, which a funny thing happened on the way to the Middle East, to the Holy Land. They decided to stop in Istanbul and just do a number on Istanbul, you know, the Eastern Church's headquarters, and Constantinople, I'm sorry. And so when they sacked Constantinople, they sacked its equivalent, the Imperial Archives, which was Constantinople's equivalent of the Library of Alexandria. See, the Library of Alexandria was not the only kind of its place. Okay, there was the Imperial Archive in Constantinople, and then there was another one I'm doing a brain dump on, but somewhere in the Far East, and they had much the same information. So when we talk about the loss of Alexandria, the library there, and all that information, we have to realize that a lot of that, most of it, was also in Constantinople. So we have the Fourth Crusade, the archives are sacked, and what's interesting is not long after that, we begin to see the Renaissance, right? Which is an advancement of knowledge and technology, and then the age of exploration, you know, wanting to go out and go to the new world. Well, what does that tell us? That tells us that when the archives were sacked, they found the lost or the old information of, you know, the rest of the globe. You know, it was after this that groups in Europe started sailing across the Atlantic, you know, and eventually the Americas were discovered. Well, I'm in that school of thought that, you know, is convinced that they knew the Americas were there. You know, the whole thing with Columbus in 1492 was a big show. Right. It was time to open it up because they needed what? They needed labor to get the gold, to get the other resources, to start working this new land. So, oh, look what Columbus discovered, when actually the Templars and other organizations knew for, you know, a couple of centuries that it was here. You know, it wasn't a surprise to them. So there was cartographic information about the world. There was lost technology information. The Teutonic Knights were among the beneficiaries of this lost cartographic and technological information that was in the archives from the past civilizations. Now, again, I'm in the school of thought that technology and civilization goes in waves, right? We reach it, it falls, and we build to the next one. Now, I've become increasingly convinced that there was a lost Vedic civilization, okay? And this is where Europeans might have got their hands on what we call the Vimana technology. And, you know, it was shared among the secret societies, which, you know, the knightly orders were very much a part of. And there's your connection that the Germans would have initially have had to this lost technology, I think, is the Fourth Crusade and what they captured from sacking the archives. So they started doing some very interesting things, particularly a specific group within Germany that took on the identity of Prussians. Okay. And what they would do is they would befriend a strong group like the Teutonic Knights. Okay. And they would use this friendship to build their own wealth, to advance their technological ideas to the extent that they could. And then when they got up on a particular level, they found a new friend and they turned that friend against the friend that helped them get to this point. And then they used that other friend to get to this point, and they turned a new ally on that. And this duplicity. This is what they did to build their wealth, to advance their technological know-how and understanding, so that by the time we get to the 19th century, they've been doing this for centuries. And this is how they operate. And one of the things they came up with was, if you want to conquer the world, go explore, go introduce them to your industry, establish your industrial base in this other part of the world, and then you get your roots into that other place and you're controlling it in effect. Okay. And then you just expand your reach. And that's what they had been doing up, and they got to the 19th century, and finally it was time to unify all these Prussian states into one big vision of a strong Germany. So World War II and Nazi Germany was just a logical destination from where they really started with their unification in the 19th century. And all this time, these technological and cartographic secrets would have been passed down through the select groups that would have, by the 19th century, have made up groups like NIMSA and other secret societies, including the ones in the 20th century, like the Thule Society and such.
Interesting. So here's a wild question. Through all of this, there's always these connections to the secret societies, and it can be, Templars, and then, Rosicrucians and Freemasons, and
right.
This and that and the other thing. And I just literally talked to, not too long ago, a gentleman from Canada who is one of the top Templars in the world, North America. And he's also like a 33rd degree Mason and York and Scottish Rite. I mean, he's in it to win it. And, he even admits, like, man, America, we were talking about the Civil War, or not the Civil War, the Revolutionary War, and how, Cornwall was a Mason, Washington was a Mason, and it was kind of maybe given up almost because America is, the vision, the dream of, what the Masons were trying to accomplish. And so it's funny that in all these secret societies, and some of them were started in Bavaria and whatnot. Mm-hmm. Was there any kind of connection with how World War II ended, and we end up getting a lot of this, United States ends up getting a lot of this technology, information and whatnot that really was started and built in Germany?
Yeah, it was directly because of Operation Paperclip.
Yeah.
A lot of people think that Paperclip was all about the bomb, getting the bomb scientists. And no, that's not what inspired Operation Paperclip. A group of Germans who were specifically aerospace medicine specialists. They came to the American aerospace medicine specialists because these guys they all knew each other before the war. They came to Colonel Harry Armstrong and said, "Hey, we have an idea. There's a whole bunch of us that you could bring to the States, and we'll work for you. Just bring us there, and we'll work for you. And look at all these wonderful things we can do for you." Well, Harry Armstrong had long been one of those Americans who, back in the 1920s, the vision was to put human beings into space. That's what these guys were all about. People say, aerospace medicine, how boring is that? Well, that's life support. You cannot have astronauts, anyone going into space without the aerospace medicine science, because that's what keeps you alive up there, right? So these guys were at the heart of everything. And this is what drove Operation Paperclip. But of course, they brought their rocket engineers, their aerospace engineers, aircraft engineers, and all of that. They brought them all. And so suddenly this stuff, at the end of the war was in the lap of the United States. But there was a price, I believe. And I'm convinced, and I wrote about this in my book, NIMSA, How America Sold Its Soul. But I see Paperclip as a Trojan horse, and it fits the exact model I described a few minutes ago about how in the medieval times, this group of Prussians would befriend a strong ally and then build themselves up to be strong enough to where then they could betray them by making another ally and turning that ally against the original ally. I think that's what's been done to the United States. What I think the Germans did to us with Operation Paperclip was it was a kind of a low-key invasion. And the ones behind this knew exactly what they were doing. Get to us by offering us, technological wonders, right? The wonder weapons that Hitler, they weren't able to get to do for Hitler, they would do for us, and they would give us supremacy. And we bought into it, the deal, hook, line, and sinker. And so what they did was they built up our military industrial complex according to their vision, and they gave us great power. And as they were doing that, they also got their tendrils into our politics. Okay. And actually, during this time, you had a battle between the post-World War II fascists and the Soviet Marxists. It's really interesting. It's an interesting story in itself. So there we were, worried about the Soviet communists besting us, finding out our secrets and stuff. And we had, as everyone knows, Nazi German guys helping us, with them. And there were people that were all for this. They thought this was great. But I think what it led to was their involvement in the JFK assassination. Wow. In my book, NIMSA, How America Lost Its Soul, I present this historical pattern, this method that they would have for infiltrating and taking over. They even had this group called the FEMA, or the FEMA. I always mispronounce it. I apologize, because if I ask two people, I'll get two different pronunciations.
Gotcha.
But it was this group that they were faceless. You didn't know exactly who they were, but they would commit political assassinations very violently and openly. And that was how they would get control over politicians and leadership, okay, and scare the populace. So the JFK assassination fits the model of that perfectly. Very public, very violent, and look what it really started to do to the country after that happened. And from there, it just got worse as the years and the decades went on, to the point where there's reason to suggest that they had a hand in 9/11 of all things. But wow. This model that I talk about that goes back to medieval times, there's a book titled The 1,000-Year Conspiracy by an author named Paul Winkler, okay? And he wrote this book in 1937. It was published in 1943, okay? And it predates Operation Paperclip. It predates the end of the war, and yet it provides the exact model of what's happened to the United States since Operation Paperclip. So it's a really eerie and kind of depressing book.
Right.
My NIMSA book was the hardest book I ever had to write, and it's one of my shortest because this stuff is not good.
It's heavy.
And one of the things we got in that, I think, was the bell.
Yeah, there's rumors that it was seen in Kecksburg, Pennsylvania, allegedly, and
I think so.
Yeah, I had an interview with, I don't know if you know a gentleman by the name of Harry Cooper. but interesting fellow. And we talked about that a little bit. He sent me a picture allegedly of the bell on a U.S. Army truck, and it was picked up in Kecksburg and taken to someplace over at Wright Pat. So
Yeah,
interesting.
sure. That makes sense. Now that would be our development of the Nazi Bell technology. But remember, in the 1893 airship mystery, which I think was a product of America's first black project, black technology project, secret, there were spinning, rotating elements to that. So I think we were aware of the rudimentary technology that we called the Bell, but it just had not been developed to the advanced level that Nazi Germany took it. Because not to be stereotypical, but they put it on steroids. They juiced it up with electromagnetism and the mercury solution, and just really, really pumped up this rudimentary Bell technology and took it to a level that it hadn't been taken before. And I do think that's what the Kecksburg UFO was our one of our iterations of post-war development of the Bell, the Glocke.
Very interesting. Very interesting. And you're basically saying too that all of this from the medieval knights and the societies, and this thing that's going on, Paperclip, and how it could very well be, the demise of America. All of this, though, you're saying this breakaway group in some way, shape, or form is kind of behind it, controlling it, pulling the strings.
Yeah, had a hand in it. I think in the case of Germany, the mysterious group NIMSA, and there are probably some other smaller groups, that Nazi Germany, the scientific and technological base, their military industrial complex, them in its purest expression, was a logical product of these mysterious groups, this breakaway NIMSA, if it was truly a breakaway. I think they saw in the rise of Nazi Germany, they saw their vision brought to life. Unfortunately, we all know where that vision led. And they seemed okay with it, obviously.
Interesting.
But, the big hole in my theory about the breakaways in the 20th century is, where were they? Where were these flying craft? Where was this technology during the 20th century, during World War I and World War II? In World War II, we heard, Foo Fighters and little glimpses of this. The whole thing about the Haunebu German flying saucers, that's a myth. That's fake. And there's people out there that are saying boo, hiss, and they're spewing venom at the screen right now because they believe it. But if you look into a guy named Ernst Zundel, Zundel, you look at him honestly, instead of being like a true believer, be objective, critical thinking. Look at Ernst Zundel and the Haunebu and all that, and you'll see how it's a fake. It was a big myth. The Bell and any exotic technology like that they would have developed more likely comes from this thread of German development dating back to at least the 1850s. That's the extent I've taken it. And it was very much human technological development.
Gotcha. At what point, if any, and I mean, this is kind of can be a taboo subject. Some people don't like to talk about it. And if that's the case, that's fine. But, we see in Nazi Germany the same thing that we see with Jack Parsons, Jet Propulsion. We see occult ritual practices, basically to connect to whatever realm where they're getting information. I mean, Jack Parsons was very, very blatantly open and honest about, hey, I learned how to make the best, most awesome rockets in the world from this thing that I do. And there's no secret about Nazi Germany, and being into the occult, having at least part of it, with their technology, they wanted all the artifacts. They searched the world for this stuff. They believed, it doesn't matter what you believe, they believed
Yeah.
there was a power to it all.
Yes.
And so, and I often look at that time period between 1945, 1950, everything that happened after Paperclip. We see, it almost feels like so much of this occult stuff really then started popping up in America. And then the next thing, what a crazy time. Next thing we know, we have the quote unquote beginnings of a deep state with the CIA and the NSA and NATO and so many different things that kind of point in a certain direction. But
yeah,
what insight could you give us on kind of the occult side of this?
Well, you have to consider all of what you just said. The Nazi scientists, anthropologists, and historians were very much into these occulted works and this occulted information, and they pursued it around the world. And look what they accomplished. They're getting something. They're getting something from these ancient archives. Okay. And then you have, you mentioned 1945 to 1950. Let me jump to back in the 80s, the mid 80s, when my mentor, who got me into my national security intelligence community career, he's also the man that taught me all sorts of interesting things about, psychic stuff and necromancy. He literally taught me how to go to a cemetery, select a person, and raise them, okay, from the dead, to get information from them. Wow. On living people. Okay. Now, this is a man that got me, opened doors for me into the FBI, and then I went into the Air Force, and he told me, a few years after he started teaching me stuff, he goes, look, there's people expecting you to know how to do this. So get over any fear, get over anything that bothers you about it. There's people expecting you to know how to do this. And between that and the stuff he told me in his career, the weird, spooky, strange occult stuff, as I went through my career, the deeper and farther I found that you went into the intelligence community, the more you encountered people who believed in these things or were practitioners of it. And so then by, I think it was 2009 or 10, Nick Redfern, I'm sure you're familiar with him.
Yeah.
Came out with a book, Final Events, in which he talks about the Collins elite. Now, this is a group of intelligence officers and federal agents from multiple agencies and branches of the military who were brought together in what you'd call a special task force in 1952. Okay. And their whole thing was to investigate, okay, and document things we would call occult and supernatural, things like that. Now, this is, from that same era that you're talking about. After Paperclip, we get these Nazi scientists. They bring all their spooky info and research to us. And then within 7 years after the war, we're forming this. Now, they didn't call themselves the Collins elite. Okay. We don't know what they call themselves. All right. And based upon the description that Nick Redfern's source gave him, I got goosebumps because they were describing my uncle's career. My mentor, it was my uncle. They were describing his career. He went into the Army in 1950, quickly went into special forces, quickly then was co-opted by the CIA. Okay, so 1952, he was right there in the heart of this kind of stuff. And everything they did and were involved in and continue to this day is the stuff that my uncle, my mentor, was telling me that I would be dealing with and using. And this was what he told me this 15, 20 years before Nick came out with that book, I'd never even heard of the Collins Elite till Nick's book, but I sure heard about using psychic abilities and remote viewing and necromancy and all this other stuff, and was told that I was expected to know how to do this stuff. So, you know, that's a big sign, a big marker that what you're saying, you know, has legs, that they brought some type of weird occult knowledge to us, and we went in, you know, all the way. And this was between 45 and 52 was also the years that Parsons was being watched closely by the FBI, and they were real curious about what he was doing, you know, not just from, as we can surmise now, not just from the perspective of security. Somebody wanted to know what he was doing, how he was doing it, and how to get results when it came to the weird operations he would do.
Yeah. Well, it's like everything else too. I mean, it's unfortunate, Walter, but it harkens to modern day, you know, the AI battle, where everyone's saying, hey, we should slow down here. Okay. Because when this thing reaches a singularity, we could be in trouble. You know, people say that. But nobody's going to slow down, because everybody knows that someone's not going to slow down. So we can't slow down. And it's the same thing, I think, back then. It's like, hey, there's some legs to this occult technology stuff. What if Russia's using it? We better get on board here, because if they're using it, they're gonna win, you know? And by God, we got the technology, we got the resources here, we got the knowledge, maybe a step up to, you know, stop Russia early.
Yeah. If there's some next level, you know, I'm sure you're familiar with Joseph Farrell. He, a good friend of mine, he's told me for years that, remember, the Soviets, they got their Nazi scientists too. And it appears that they started pursuing a different physics. We were attached to Einsteinian physics, you know, and there's rules, and you can't do this and you can't do that. Whereas the Soviets, they went about it a different way, to the extent that we have, in the last 10 years, I think, or so, Putin making a vague comment about asymmetrical technologies. You know, when the US Navy was showing off its latest, you know, in the traditional military stuff, the Russians did a little demonstration. They had a couple of jets buzz a couple of our battleships, okay, and we didn't see it coming at all.
Right.
Okay. And when it was talked about publicly, Putin made his reference to asymmetrical technologies. So we have to wonder, what exactly does that mean? You know, what do they have that gives them confidence that, despite what, you know, when we wiggle ours around, they're not worried about it, you know? You have to wonder, and that falls in line, I think, with what you were saying, is people are going to develop whether the rest of the world is not doing it. You know, they're going to push this stuff. They're going to advance it. They want to see what's on the other side of the door. They want to see what's on the other side of the horizon. I mean, just for that alone, some pretty wild things have been discovered and invented, and that's a strong draw. You know, the way I personally look at life, as I've gotten older, arcane knowledge is the most appealing thing to me, more appealing than anything. Arcane knowledge. And that's the way these guys think. You know, it's you open up multiple dimensions, perhaps. That's what Parsons indicated that he was doing. That's what Crowley was doing. Maybe that's what, you know, the Germans were doing during the war, and maybe that's what we've been doing since the end of the war, is forging contacts with someone, you know, beyond space, or in that space between spaces. And it, you know, it's so with disclosure of not disclosure, it's the wrong word. You know, where you can go and get
classified records and whatnot. And there's so much stuff out there that's just like, what that was. And I'm not talking like the low hanging fruit like MK Ultra and all that. I'm just talking like little things like the gateway process, things like that, the papers that they're writing on it, where they're trying, it's obvious you're just trying to reach this place, this other dimension, whatever it is, because there's information there, and some of the stuff is just wild. That the I forget what he was. He was a high ranking officer, and he wrote this paper about the whole thing, and he's just like, hey, part of the training has to be, you got to know how to defend yourself, because there's creatures over there that, sometimes they don't like you. And so you have to know, you got to know how to defend yourself. And I mean, it's like wild, it's right there. And most people don't even take the time to, and most people are skeptical about it, think, oh, this is just wacky woo woo, and it's like, well,
sure.
It's not,
sure.
Just,
and they count on that fact that most people aren't going to care about this stuff. And those of us who do care about it are interested, they can brush us off and, make us look like nerds to the rest of the people. And we're not really a threat to their secrecy, but, talk about resources for the lost technology. Think about our space program. What were we really looking for up on the moon? What did we actually find up there? I think that the big secret about the moon isn't that we didn't go. I want to laugh every time I hear that, but God bless them. They take themselves so seriously that we didn't go to the moon crap. I think that the big secret is what we actually found up there. And we found relics of people in past civilizations that did the same thing, that went from here to the moon. Same thing on Mars. I think what we found up there are the ruins of a past civilization that, according to one researcher, John Brandenburg, they were destroyed a long time ago in a war.
Yeah.
And which could suggest that some of them came here.
Yeah.
And all of us have their DNA.
Just had George Haas on, and we were talking about that. It's pretty wild. And some of 90-degree angles in nature just aren't what happens, Right? Just doesn't happen. So, what happened down in, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so, it gives you a different perspective on our space program. Maybe it's an archaeological gig first and foremost.
Well, speaking of faraway places that you don't get to go to that often, that might be archaeological, what's been going on? What do you know about Antarctica?
Well,
there's so much. I mean, the German bases, UFO bases, Hitler escapes to Argentina, blah, 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 blah.
There's all the stuff that everybody knows about, the stuff that we know the Germans did, the stuff that we know we did, U.S. Navy. And then there's all that stuff that's left out of that. What I find really interesting about recent years is that the story going around that's really popular is something I was told 25, almost 30 years ago by my mentor in a private conversation. He said, now get this, I had this friend of mine, these two friends of mine, they were like surrogate grandparents, an older couple, and he passed away in the late 80s, and some weird stuff turned up in his private belongings, some of which was U.S. Air Force issue Arctic gear, okay? And when I was talking with my mentor about that, he said he was in our community. He was in the intelligence community, was doing special stuff for the Air Force. And back in 1960, he was sent to Antarctica because he was on this team of people who investigated this giant hole. That's how it was described to me. This giant hole was found in Antarctica in 1960. I'm being told this in like 1994 or 5, I think, mid 90s. and that this happened 35 years prior, and that they found this ancient, huge machinery, is how it was described to me. It was old, very ancient, but it was huge. Okay. And there was something else there that scared the hell out of the team that went down there. And they all came out catatonic, including this gentleman I had known. And an interesting tale. And I'm told this in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
Okay. And I'm told just in a private conversation with my mentor, and it's indicated to me I'm not supposed to talk about this. So here we have 25, 30 years later in our world, UFO land, it's popular that, oh, this team in Antarctica, oh, there's this giant cavern, oh, they go in and something scares them, oh, there's machinery. And so my opinion, remember, between the time I was told about this and when this started making the rounds in our community, I had already spent my career and learned a lot about the intelligence community and that profession. And so I began to wonder, okay, was this what we call an inking the water operation? Okay. If you want to test the trustworthiness of someone, you want to tell them something and you say, don't tell anyone about this. So that if they do run their mouth and it emerges downstream, so to speak, you can trace where it came from. And, you can say, oh, it came from this guy that I told to keep his mouth shut. Now I know I can't trust him with secrets. It's called inking the water. You drop the ink in the water and you see where it goes, right? So I began to wonder, okay, I wonder if this Antarctica story was a popular, so to speak, inking the water lore that they would use on guys like me who were young in their career and, being tailored for this to see if they were trustworthy. Tell them this wild story about Antarctica with certain specifics, okay? And tell them, don't you dare tell anybody, okay? And then, if it doesn't emerge, and they can't, or if it does emerge, but they can't trace it to you, they can trust you. You get the idea. So I'm wondering if this popular stuff we're hearing about Antarctica isn't an inking the water thing. Like people in our community, they've said, well, this source told me this and I trust the source. Well, what's the source's bona fides? How did the source prove that he was a former SEAL or this, that, or the other?
Yeah.
Well, no. Well, doesn't cut it. Did you see a DD-214? Did you get any kind of, verifier that this guy is what he says he was? And unfortunately, all too often, they don't. It's just such exciting stuff, and it's presented in such a spooky way that they choose to believe it because it's more fun. It's something more exciting to report on. But what I think is, on the one hand, I think it's something that is an inking the water method. And our community got tripped up in it. Somebody in our community was inked. Now, whether, and not a tattoo, whether they were being considered to be in the community or whether it was to test the community's gullibility, I don't know. But I, on the one hand, I think the community was ink in the water, that it's a BS story and it was to lead a bunch of us astray. On the other hand, there could very well be something to it. And the theme is being used perhaps in some perception management scheme or whatever. So you gotta take your pick from your own perspective. Is it just BS to mess with people, to test their trustworthiness, their gullibility? Yeah. Or is there some weird roundabout way that they're trying to reveal a lost past? That's where I'm at with it. I don't know exactly which one it is. I lean toward the second one, but
well, the one thing that always kind of, and recently I learned something, obviously Admiral Byrd goes down, Operation Highjump. What was it? 47, 46, 47, whenever it was.
47.
We go down there. with the task force. I mean, it is, the war is over. The war is over. Everybody's just got, just out-resourced themselves. Everyone's just taking a big breath, man. It's like, holy cow, we just had this massive war. Everybody just chill out for a second.
Yeah.
And we are putting together we're going to war. It feels like. And he goes down there, and this mission that was supposed to last months, and it gets turned away. It crawls back, and it doesn't make it back to the port in Virginia. It makes it to, a port in Chile, the first deep water port they can get to. Admiral Byrd has some interesting things to say when he gets interviewed by the press there, about the craft that enemies has that can now fly from pole to pole, in seconds, all that. Allegedly, I think it was the USS Maddox, was sunk. Obviously, there's video of guys coming off the boats and stretchers and whatnot. They got something happened, whatever that was, something happened. And so, and I think the thing that I just learned that I thought was very interesting is maybe it's not what our intelligence says, but what we heard through spies in Russian intelligence who were far less worried about classifying it. And they said, yeah, they went down there. There was aliens. We were going to kick them out and got our butts kicked. That's just the essence of it. What do you think of any of that?
Well, that's just it. It's, on the one hand, I don't think that, for instance, I think that 90% of legitimate UFO reports, I say legitimate because a lot of people lie about having seen a UFO because they want to be part of the fun. I saw one too, but the legitimate UFO reports, 90% of them, that's human technology, whether misidentified or classified. So that puts aliens in the remaining 10%, and they don't make up that remaining 10%. They make up, in my opinion, a very, very small percentage. But remember, it only needs one. You only need one ET to prove it once and for all. So, whereas I think that ETs are real and they have come here, and I think they are coming here, I don't think they're, the answer for everything. Yeah. But Antarctica would make sense because it's so, far away from everything, right? Remote. It's the same thing as being in the bottom of the ocean. Go find the center of the Pacific and just go down to the bottom there. Go down to the Marianas Trench. If you got the technologies to survive down there, these crazy humans on Earth here, they're not going to find you. And, maybe the same thing with Antarctica. Maybe that is the logical place for them to be. Perhaps it was the remnant, the last stronghold of the Breakaway, NIMSA or whoever, being down there. I do think something we haven't been told about is there. And I think something, and we haven't been told about this, I think something did happen during the
high jump.
Yeah, high jump. Yeah, thank you. What it was exactly, like I said, it could be 2 or 3 options, but we have not been told. I'm very strongly in support of the idea that they have found ancient ruins. I don't think Antarctica underneath that ice was just, nature's wonderland. I think there was, civilization was there too. They probably have found relics and ruins, under the ice. That might have been what the Germans found when they went there. And for whatever reason, they want to keep that secret from us. That could suggest that, that was an extraterrestrial civilization originally, or maybe that's where they landed on Earth. I don't know, but there's some reason they don't want to reveal to us what they've found.
Interesting. I don't know. It's just it feels like there's some sort of there. Obviously, I don't know. But it has always just seemed a little, but there's on the other side of it, people's like, oh, you can't go down to Antarctica. Well, there's a guy named Will Duffy who just went down for a thing called the Final Experiment last year. And, went with a number of people to prove that the earth wasn't flat.
Yeah.
It's like you can go down there. It might cost you $30,000, $40,000, but you can go down there. And he went inland. It wasn't like he was, just right on the coast or in a boat off the water. No, he went, we're 500 miles, 400 miles inland. So it's like, yeah.
I think increasingly the days of people being able to come from out of there and make hay out of, hey, I was in Antarctica for a year and I could tell you secrets and stuff. I think increasingly people are going to get down there and they are going to go deeper in and see it. And, the people aren't going to be able to pull these cons anymore about, what's there and what's not there. And can you get there or can you not get there?
I find it so funny. Just there's a number of people that I've listened to and they have this big, tough guy. Well, you can't get down there, man, because there's government operation going on. And it's like,
you can't get in certain facilities. Sure. Absolutely. But as far as going there, they prefer that people not go down there willy-nilly because of medical reasons. That drives 90% of, I think, what I've seen. I think that drives 90% of why it's so restricted is because they don't want to have to airlift you out of there if you have some type of heart issue or some medical emergency. They don't want to have to deal with that.
Yeah.
So I think that's the big thing that drives the because it's easy to keep unauthorized personnel out of your restricted facility.
Yeah, and of course there's restricted facilities everywhere. It's like, oh, that's funny. Speaking of restricted facilities, a lot of this, there's these rumors about breakaway civilizations, the elite or whatever you want to call it, that, have these massive underground tunnels, bases, societies, almost all underground, underground military bases, all this, allegedly aliens there as well. But allegedly some of them are like Noah's Arks in case there's some, whatever nemesis or whatever's coming to, destroy the planet or war or whatever. And of course we see that allegedly $21 trillion has disappeared out of our, tax money, federal government. Are they building this, breakaway, underground, universe? What's your thoughts on that?
I think that ever since the Cold War started, underground facilities were being built for obvious reasons, when the bombs come down, that kind of thing. And then as technology advances and there are more planetary threats identified, well, good thing we built these underground facilities. Let's expand them. Let's, advance them, and make them better. I think that's a reality, whether it's military installations or what they call the continuity of government sites, to keep our leaders safe, even if we're dying up on the surface. But there's also for a long time been in human lore and mythology, the underworld and the people who live underground and went underground. And I think there's a nugget of truth somewhere in there. And I think there are others who share this world with us who are under our feet. They're under the ground. And, some of my research has gone into this with there in all my nonfiction work. There's a couple of threads that run through all of it, whether I'm writing about Disneyland, whether I'm writing about what I think were the occult motivated murders in 1915 in San Bernardino, whether I'm writing about Sir Richard Francis Burton finding a lost city, and whatever I'm writing about, things that seem to have no connections overtly, there are two threads running through all of them. Those two threads are the goddess Hecate and this mysterious group of people, beings called the Tuatha Dé Danann by the Irish. Now that's what the Irish, the ancient Celts, called them, the Tuatha Dé Danann. And they are these people who came from another world I know what the anthropologists say. They like to turn everything boring and deflate stuff to it's all anthropology. And they'll tell you that the Tuatha De Danann were nothing but a bunch of Mediterranean tribes who, you know, sailed up the shores of Ireland and put out smoke pots and smoke bombs, you know, to be scary. When you read how the Tuatha De Danann actually originally arrived, they arrive out of the sky and they land on a mountain. They don't land on the seashore, and they come with great tumult. It's some type of craft, you could argue, or some type of phenomena that allows them to travel either through space or dimensions or whatever. And these beings, they have, they're very much human in appearance, but they have these abilities and these items, this technology that basically screams advanced or exotic technology. And then when they do retreat, they're on Earth for a while, influencing us, and they go around the world. When they disappear from Ireland, the same group shows up in Asia, and then when they disappear from there, they show up in the Americas, and they're under different names, but you know, when you read the descriptions of the different identities, it's the same beings. So then when they finally withdraw from their overt influence on us, they go underground, they go into the subterranean, and they're still with us, I think. They're still with us, influencing us, and maybe they're the ones who are underneath the ice in Antarctica.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Are we talking more underground like caves? Are we talking hollow earth? Are we talking like Agartha? What are we talking?
Well, the popular notion of the hollow earth isn't likely, you know, the reality, but large habitable zones and pockets.
Yeah,
under the surface that you could get to through caverns. Now, remember, there's long been the talk of the tunnel system, the ancient tunnel system that the Tibetans knew about, and that the in Peru they knew about, and so there's that going on. You know, who made those tunnels? Was it the Tuatha De Danann? You know, who could it have been? There's all that lore, and I think when you at least give it a consideration of a nugget of truth in there, possibly, you have to consider these things.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we're talking caverns, tunnels, vast spaces.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot. That's the thing that I've noticed getting into this space more and more is just because there's a lot of smoke doesn't mean there's fire, but sometimes, right, you know, you start thinking about where's all the smoke coming from, and it'll open up some doors, you know. No doubt about it.
Yeah.
I know we just kind of like we're solving all the world's problems here, Walter. You know,
that's right.
We're just figuring it all out. Let me. There's a couple other questions I wanted to ask you.
Sure.
Because I just this stuff is all fascinating to me. You know, you got to be careful talking about this, obviously, and I'm looking at this just from a pure knowledge standpoint of trying to understand better. These secret societies, this breakaway group, there's like this power and control structure that's out there. And in any way, do you feel, you know, secret societies, Templars, Jesuits, you know, Cathars, all these different groups, was that part of their long game, what you're talking about maybe with this breakaway group?
Some of them, yeah, you know, some of them, yeah, I think. Well, you mean long game where we're at today with civilization? Yeah, some of them, and then others. I think the ones that there was kind of the evidence that they existed, they were emerging, and then where are they? I think they might have achieved their goal, and they're doing it. They're living it, either with us on this world under our noses, doing their own thing, which could explain some of the legitimate UFOs and other weird things, or they went somewhere else. They successfully went somewhere else.
Interesting.
And then I think there's other groups that they wish that they could achieve like the Jesuits. I think they wish they could achieve what breakaways have. They remember they serve limited. They serve the Vatican. They specifically serve the Pope. So, they're just the spies for the Pope. And, we can look at the things historically that they've done that are not good and talk about that all day long. The Templars, whatever they evolved into, whoever and whatever they are today, I think some of them might be involved in a breakaway, but they themselves, I don't see them as achieving this breakaway status. Now, the group that I hypothesize, was brought in by the US government to work on this hypothetical black technology project that I think resulted in the 1890s airships. They seem to have disappeared, and they might be one of the ones who are so successfully doing their own thing that we don't know where they're at today, or they left. There's going to be habitable places out there. This is going to be an overt reality in our lives at some point, that there's other worlds we can go to and live on. I think that was our past. It's legacy. That's our future. We are not garden tenders. We go from world to world. We're nomads. And there's people who don't like that. Well, okay, too bad. I think that's in our nature, and I think that's where a lot of this stuff has come from. A lot of the knowledge that gets passed down through the secret societies, and it's kept so controlled. I think some of it has its origins elsewhere, and was brought here, say, by these Martians who escaped the destruction of Mars long ago. And they came here. And I think they're just as human as, I think that's one of the big secrets, is a lot of these aliens out there, there are humans exactly like us. Okay. Now, people say, when I hear science nerds and scientists, even professional scientists, say, there's no way that human beings exactly like us could have originated on any other planet. Well, my first question is, have you been to all the known habitable worlds in the universe? Well, no. Then you can't say that. Shut up with that nonsense. Because until you've been there and you've proven, you can't say that. That's ridiculous. We're here. We exist. We are a model you can point to. So why couldn't we also, be originating on other worlds? It's ridiculous to just assume we can't because our arrogant scientists haven't found anything that convinces them. So, I think the people that came from Mars were just humans exactly like us, and I think all of us by now have some of their DNA. And that might be what the Human Genome Project was all about, really, to identify who among us has the off-world DNA, maybe the Martian DNA, and how much of it. Yeah. And so, there's something there that could be, looked into. But
there's no doubt about that, Walter. I mean, listen, DNA, bloodlines, man, so important, has been so important. And it doesn't matter if you're talking about royal families, royal bloodlines, it doesn't matter, power structures, it doesn't matter if you're talking about occult things, it doesn't matter if you're talking about secret societies, even. Bloodlines, DNA, matter.
Yes.
I mean, and I think it's, if people were to really understand to what degree it matters, they would be mind blown.
Well, if they learned why it actually matters, I think that would be very revealing, particularly with our ideas of monarchy. Look, a lot of human beings, they want to be led. They want something to worship. Yeah. Okay. And so these blue bloods, these royals, you go back to how this stuff originated. Well, they were either the offspring of the priesthood, which had exclusive access to these gods, or they were the offspring of these gods themselves. They said, see, we're different because we're demigods.
Yeah.
We're of the godly bloodline, and you, the common people, are not. So that's why we're so special. Now, I think there's people who respond to that, and then there's people who just dismiss it. I'm one of those who dismisses it. I have no interest in who's royal. I don't see these people as special to any degree. Okay, I'm one of the curmudgeons that back in 1980, when American TV was being preempted for that stupid royal wedding between Charles and Diana, I mean, that aggravated me. It's like, what, really, America? Really? You're going to be so fascinated with this royal wedding that, it's got to be everywhere? I don't know. It just kind of perturbed me. And as I've gotten older and learned more about this weird stuff and looked into the arcane stuff, it disgusts me even more, because all it is one group of humans, very mortal, fallible humans, convincing another group that, they're more special than they are because of something in their blood. And, so.
I don't disagree with you. What makes it interesting to me is why I kind of think it's a big deal to whatever degree and for whatever reason is because they think it's a big deal.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's kind of like, and speaking of which, you've hinted about non-human, and I don't even know how to say the Tuatha, whatever, Diadane.
Tuatha, and I got that from an Irishman. I said, how do I pronounce this properly? He says, Tuatha Diadane.
Okay, I'm going to clip that and just play it overnight in my head so I can say it correctly, and that quickly too.
You're going to find 5 or 10 people out there. They're going to say, he doesn't know what he's talking about. It's this, it's the Tuatha. You know how our world is today. There's
I'm going to say
somebody who knows more than everybody else.
I'm going to say, dude, I learned this from Walter Bosley. Back off. That's what I'm going to say. No, but seriously, these non-human influence, you talked about them. You talked about, or there could be other ones. We talked about aliens potentially from other planets. We talked about us from other planets, or the future, past, whatever. There's all these different probabilities, possibilities, and whatnot. I'm not one to just check the box off and say nope, because I don't know. But the other one that is very interesting, and you kind of touch base on it, is the gods, the gods. And there's the Sumerian legends, the Anunnaki. There's every culture has them. And if you really start doing the research, you see they're kind of all talking about the same dudes and ladies. Just, different cultures have different names for them. You go even in the Bible with Genesis 6, the watcher angels coming down to Mount Hermon, all that. Is any of that the gods, no matter what angle you're coming at this from, are they potentially something to do with aliens?
Oh yeah, by their definition, they're aliens to this world, right? They come from somewhere else, so they're extraterrestrial. They're not of the Earth.
Man, I appreciate you. You're just a wealth of knowledge. I love your breadth of your knowledge as well. Where do people find out more about you, your books, everything?
Well, my books are all at walterbosley.com. And if you get them at walterbosley.com, you're going to get a better price than you get anywhere else. Like if some of them are on Amazon, but Amazon's not good to authors because we get very little royalty if you buy it at Amazon. So get them at walterbosley.com. And also there's the Walter Bosley channel at YouTube. And I have episodes there and occasionally go live. And those are the 2 best places to find me.
Very cool. Very cool. What's your summer looking like? The rest of your summer? Are you doing traveling? What's going on?
Yeah, we're busy working. We've got an event that we're trying to put on in November up here in Big Bear called the Lost Horizons Symposium and Harmonicon. And there's going to be more about that very soon at walterbosley.com. There is some already, but we're doing this 4-day event kind of on a theme of Vedic mysteries and, lost civilization type stuff. 4 days up in Big Bear, California, Big Bear Lake in November. And you'll be able to find more details soon at walterbosley.com, but there is some there already. So we're busy with that, getting that set up and other little projects.
Awesome, man. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the Ryan Files. It's great talking to you. Like I said, I appreciate your knowledge base and just keep on keeping on. All right.
Well, thanks for having me. I really enjoyed this. Let's do it again.
I appreciate you. Thank you. We'll have you back for sure. Ladies and gentlemen, he's awesome. The one and only Walter Bosley. Thank you, sir. Wow, from secret breakaway groups to ancient anti-gravity blueprints, Walter Bosley just lit up some of the darkest corners of our hidden history. Whether you walk away skeptical or stunned, there's no denying something strange is echoing through our past, and it's still shaping our world today. If you want to dig deeper, head over to theryanfiles.com. That's your command center for full episodes, bonus drops, and links to support the show. Want to join the mission? Become an agent of the Ryan Files at patreon.com/theryanfiles. Unlock exclusive episodes, behind-the-scenes clips, and support our fight for the truth. Or hit that join button right here on YouTube to become a channel member, get early access, and custom emojis. Here's your mission this week. What do you think happened in Antarctica? Ancient tech? Nazi refuge? Deep state diversion? Alien base? Drop your theories in the comments. I'll be watching. You folks are awesome. Be amazing, be positive, and stay curious out there, my friends. And I'll see you right here next week on The Ryan Files.
Are you not curious?
Preparing to transfer the Ryan Files. Now.
I present to you, with great intrigue and wonder, the Ryan